Hello ji, namaste. I am Shivangi and we are meeting at our place. Let's read. कई बार हम भारी भरकम किताबें पढ़ने की इच्छा तो रखते हैं एंड स्पेशली आफ्टर द लॉकडाउन हमें बहुत मन करता है कि हम किताबें पढ़ें बिकॉज एक आदत सी हो गई थी ना एंड अब करने के लिए काफ़ी कुछ है हम काफ़ी बिजी हैं इन आर लाइफ बट कभी ना कभी तो मन कर ही जाता है एंड ऑडियो बुक्स जो अवेलेबल होती हैं उन पे हमारा ध्यान ही नहीं अटकता सो हियर्स व्हाट वी आर गोइंग टू डू. I'll take up your suggestions from the comment section and we'll choose one book to read for the whole week, okay? And I'll share the book over the screen and अपन साथ में पढ़ लेंगे यार. What I'll do is I'll read it for you and you can read it along with me from the screen only. So आपको बुक्स नहीं लेने के लिए जाना है, आप अपने बेड के कंफर्ट में आराम से पढ़ सकते हैं एंड आपको मन किया तो आप तुरंत बंद करके रख के सो भी सकते हैं. So विन विन है ना यार. We'll do it over two Pomodoro sessions, serious में, and to increase the productivity. 25 minutes का each Pomodoro session and 5 minute का break in between. So let's start. अब today चूंकि हमने कुछ book decide नहीं किया है तो what I'll do is I'll take one book from my own conscience and it's actually a book very close to my heart and yeah, it has actually helped me change my life, like not in a preachy way, in a good way. It has increased my productivity, it has increased my thought, sorry, it has increased my hold over my thoughts. So it's called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. So what I'll also do is कि मैं starting में before we start with the session I'll tell you some facts about the book ताकि आपका इंटरेस्ट बना रहे, यू गेट टू नो मोर अबाउट इट एंड आप रिसर्च भी कर सकें. सो इट वॉज पब्लिश्ड बाय द ऑथर हिमसेल्फ इन 1903, या दैट बैक. And the title is influenced by the seventh verse. If you can recall, it's the seventh verse of chapter 23 of the book of Proverbs in the King James Version of the Bible. The book may come across as preachy sometimes, but let's face it, which book does not? It's up to us to take in as per our appetite, है ना? And let the rest go. It's not that you have to read it, you have to consume in everything. It's actually true about every other book available in the domain. You have to take up what suits you, what changes you, what forces you to think, what broadens your horizon, and you have to let the rest go. बिना माइंड दिए कंज्यूम करोगे तो उल्टियां तो होंगी ही. Anyway, as the author has himself aptly mentioned and clarified about the book, this book shows how each man in his own thought world holds the key to every condition, good or bad, whatever it may be, that enters into his life, and that by working patiently and intelligently upon his thoughts, he may remake his life and transform itself. Yes, it's a book, as the author says, it's a book that will help you help yourself. Yes. So let's start. I'll start the Pomodoro session and then we'll go read the book. Okay? So here's the book. It was actually published in 2003, I guess, by the Gutenberg thing, Gutenberg project. Yes, the Gutenberg etexts. So you can find it online also. It's a very small book. It's divided into 7 chapters, and it goes on to 23 or 22 pages, I guess. I'm not sure. Let's read and we'll find it out. So here the author himself describes it. Mind is the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind, and evermore he takes the tool of thought, and shaping what he wills, brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. As you can see from the contents, it's divided into 7 chapters of very intriguing headlines. So here's what the foreword says. This little volume, the result of meditation and experience, is not intended as an exhaustive treatise on the much written upon subject of the power of thought. It is suggestive rather than explanatory, its object being to stimulate men and women to the discovery and perception of the truth that they themselves are maker of themselves by virtue of the thoughts which they choose, and encourage that mind is the master weaver, both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance, and that as they may have hitherto woven in ignorance and pain, they may now weave in enlightenment and happiness. See how well he compares this ignorance and pain to enlightenment and happiness. So here's what the book does to you. No, in actuality. So let's start with it. The aphorism, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, not only embraces the whole of a man's being, but is so comprehensive as to reach out to every condition and circumstance of his life. A man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts. As the plant springs from and could not be without the seed, so every act of a man springs from the hidden seeds of thought and could not have appeared without them. This applies equally to those acts called spontaneous and unpremeditated as to those which are deliberately executed. Act is the blossom of thought, and joy and suffering are its fruits. Thus does a man garner in the sweet and bitter fruitage of his own husbandry. Thought in the mind hath made us, what we are by thought was, wrought and built. If a man's mind hath evil thoughts, pain comes as comes the wheel the ox behind. If one endure in purity of thought, joy follows him, as his own shadow sure. Man is a growth by law, and not a creation by artifice. And cause and effect is an absolute and undeviating in the hidden realm of thought, as in the world of visible and material things. A noble and godlike character is not a thing of favor or chance, but is the natural result of continued effort in the right thinking, the effect of long cherished association with godlike thoughts. An ignoble and bestial character, by the same process, is the result of the continued harboring of groveling thoughts. Man is made or unmade by himself. In the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. He also fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace. By the right choice and true application of thought, man ascends to the divine perfection. By the abuse and wrong application of thought, he descends below the level of the beast. Between these two extremes are all the grades of character, and man is their maker and master. Of all the beautiful truths pertaining to the soul which have been restored and brought to light in this age, none is more gladdening or fruitful of divine promise and confidence than this, that man is the master of thought, the moulder of character, and the maker and shaper of condition, environment, and destiny. As a being of power, intelligence, and love, and the lord of his own thoughts, man holds the key to every situation and contains within himself that transforming and regenerative agency by which he may make himself what he wills. Man is always the master, even in his weaker and most abundant state. But in his weakness and degradation, he is the foolish master who misgoverns his household. When he begins to reflect upon his condition and to search diligently for the law upon which his being is established, he then becomes the wise master, directing his energies with intelligence and fashioning his thoughts to fruitful issues. Such is the conscious master, and man can only thus become by discovering within himself the laws of thought, which discovery is totally a matter of application, self analysis, and experience. Only by much searching and mining are gold and diamonds obtained, and man can find every tooth connected with his being. If he will dig deep into the mine of his soul, and that he is the maker of his character, the molder of his life, and the builder of his destiny, he may unerringly prove, if he will watch, control, and alter his thoughts, tracing their effects upon himself, upon others, and upon his life and circumstances, linking cause and effect by patient practice and investigation, and utilizing his every experience, even to the most trivial everyday occurrence, as a means of obtaining that knowledge of himself which is understanding, wisdom, power. In this direction, as in no other, is the law absolute that he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. For only by patience, practice, and ceaseless importunity can a man enter the door of the temple of knowledge. Chapter 2, Effect of Thought on Circumstances. Man's mind may be linked to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein and will continue to produce their kind. Just as a gardener cultivates his plot, keeping it free from weeds and growing the flowers and fruits which he requires, so may a man tend the garden of his mind, weeding out all the wrong, useless, and impure thoughts, and cultivating toward perfection the flowers and fruits of right, useful, and pure thoughts. By pursuing this process, a man sooner or later discovers that he is the master gardener of his soul, the director of his life. He also reveals within himself the laws of thought and understands with ever increasing accuracy how the thought forces and mind elements operate in the shaping of his character, circumstances, and destiny. Thought and character are one, and as character can only manifest and discover itself through environment and circumstance, the outer conditions of a person will always be found to be harmoniously related to his inner state. This does not mean that a man's circumstances at any given time are an indication of his entire character, but that those circumstances are so intimately connected with some vital thought element within himself that, for the time being, they are indispensable to his development. Every man is where he is by the law of his being. The thoughts which he has built into his character have brought him there. And in the arrangement of his life, there is no element of chance, but all is the result of a law which cannot err. This is just as true of those who feel out of harmony with their surroundings as of those who are contented with them. As a progressive and evolving being, man is where he is that he may learn, that he may grow. And he learns, and as he learns the spiritual lesson which any circumstance contains for him, it passes away and gives place to other circumstances. Man is buffeted by circumstances so long as he believes himself to be the creator of outside conditions. But when he realizes that he is a creative power and that he may command the hidden soil and seeds of his being out of which circumstances grow, he then becomes the rightful master of himself. That circumstances grow out of thought, every man knows who has for any length of time practiced self control and self purification. For he will have noticed that the alteration in his circumstances has been in exact ratio with his altered mental condition. Read that again. Okay. So, true is this that when a man earnestly applies himself to remedy the defects in his character, and makes swift and marked progress, he passes rapidly through a succession of vicissitudes. The soul attracts that which it secretly harbors, that which it loves, and also that which it fears. It reaches the height of its cherished aspirations, it falls to the level of its unchastened desires, and circumstances are the means by which the soul receives its own. Every thought seed sown or allowed to fall into the mind or to take root there produces its own, blossoming sooner or later into act, and bearing its own fruitage of opportunity and circumstance. Good thoughts bear good fruit, bad thoughts bad fruit. The outer world of circumstance shapes itself to the inner world of thought, and both pleasant and unpleasant external conditions are factors which make for the ultimate good of the individual. As the reaper of his own harvest, man learns both by suffering and bliss. Following the inmost desires, aspirations, thoughts by which he allows himself to be dominated, pursuing the will o the wisps of impure imaginings, or steadfastly walking the highway of strong and high endeavour. A man at last arrives at their fruition and fulfilment in the outer conditions of his life. The laws of growth and adjustment everywhere obtains. A man does not come to the almshouse or the jail by the tyranny of fate or circumstance, but by the pathway of grovelling thoughts and base desires. Nor does a pure minded man fall suddenly into crime by stress of any mere external force. The criminal thought that has been long secretly fostered in the heart, and the hour of opportunity revealed its gathered power. Circumstance does not make the man, it reveals him to himself. No such conditions can exist as descending into vice and its attendant sufferings apart from vicious inclinations, or ascending into virtue and its pure happiness without the continued cultivation of virtuous aspirations. And man, therefore, as the lord and master of thought, is the maker of himself, the shaper and author of environment. Even at birth, the soul comes to its own, and through every step of its earthly pilgrimage, it attracts those combinations of conditions which reveal itself, which are the reflections of its own purity and impurity, its strength and weakness. Men do not attract that which they want, but that which they are. Their whims, fancies, and ambitions are thwarted at every step. But their inmost thoughts and desires are fed with their own food, be it foul or clean. The divinity that shapes our ends is in ourselves. It is our very self. Only himself manacles man. Thought and action are the gaolers of fate. They imprison being base. They are also the angels of freedom. They liberate being noble. Not what he wishes and prays, for does a man get, but what he justly earns. His wishes and prayers are only gratified and answered when they harmonize with his thoughts and actions. In the light of this truth, what then is the meaning of fighting against circumstances? It means that a man is continually revolting against an effect without, while all the time he is nourishing and preserving its cause in his heart. That cause may take the form of a conscious vice or an unconscious weakness, but whatever it is, it stubbornly retards the efforts of its possessor and thus calls aloud for remedy. Men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. They therefore remain bound. Read that again. The man who does not shrink from self crucifixion can never fail to accomplish the objects which his heart has set. This is as true of earthly as of heavenly things. Even the man whose sole object is to acquire wealth must be prepared to make great personal sacrifices before he can accomplish his object. And how much more so could he would realize a strong and well poised life. Here is a man who is wretchedly poor. He is extremely anxious that his surroundings and home comforts should be improved. Yet, all the time he shirks his work and considers he is justified in trying to deceive his employer on the ground of insufficiency of his wages. Such a man does not understand the simplest rudiments of those principles which are basis of true prosperity, and is only totally unfitted to rise out of his wretchedness, but is actually attracting to himself a still deeper wretchedness by dwelling in and acting out indolent, deceptive, and unmanly thoughts. Here is a rich man who is the victim of a painful, persistent disease as a result of gluttony. He is willing to give large sums of money to get rid of it, but he will not sacrifice his gluttonous desires. He wants to gratify his taste for rich and unnatural viands and have his health as well. Such a man is totally unfit to have health because he has not yet learned the first principles of a healthy life. Here is an employer of labor who adopts crooked measures to avoid paying the regulation wage and, in the hope of making larger profits, reduces the wage of his workplace. Such a man is altogether unfitted for prosperity. And when he finds himself bankrupt, both as regards and reputations and riches, he blames circumstances, not knowing that he is the sole author of his condition. I have introduced these three cases merely as illustrative of the truth, that man is the causer, though nearly always is unconsciously, of his circumstances, and that whilst aiming at a good end, he is continually frustrating its accomplishment by encouraging thoughts and desires which cannot possibly harmonize with that end. Such cases could be multiplied and varied almost indefinitely, but this is not necessary, as the reader can, if he so resolves, trace the action of the laws of thought in his own mind and life. And until this is done, mere external factors cannot serve as a ground of reasoning. Circumstances, however, are so complicated, thought is so deeply rooted, and the conditions of happiness vary so vastly with individuals that a man's entire soul condition, although it may be known to himself, cannot be judged by another from the external aspect of his life alone. A man may be honest in certain directions, yet suffer privations. A man may be dishonest in certain directions, yet acquire wealth. But the conclusion usually formed that the one man fails because of his particular honesty and that the other prospers because of its particular dishonesty is the result of a superficial judgment, which assumes that the honest man is almost totally corrupt and the honest man almost entirely virtuous. In the light of a deeper knowledge and wider experience, such judgment is found to be erroneous. The dishonest man may have some admirable virtues which the other does not possess, and the honest man obnoxious vices which are absent in the other. The honest man reaps the good result of his good thoughts and acts. He also brings upon himself the sufferings which his vices produce. The dishonest man likewise garners his own suffering and happiness. It is pleasing to human vanity to believe that one suffers because of one's virtue, but not until a man has extirpated every sickly, bitter, and impure thought from his mind and washed every sinful stain from his soul can he be in a position to know and declare that his sufferings are the result of his good and not of his bad qualities, and on the way to yet long before he has reached that supreme perfection, he will have found working in his mind and life the great law which is absolutely just and which cannot therefore give good for evil, evil for good. Possessed of such knowledge, he will then know, looking back upon his past ignorance and blindness, that his life is and always was justly ordered, and that all his past experiences, good and bad, were the equitable outworking of his evolving yet unevolved self. Good thoughts and actions can never produce bad results. Bad thoughts and actions can never produce good results. This is but saying that nothing can come from corn but corn, nothing from nettles but nettles. Men understand this law in the natural world and work with it, but few understand it in the mental and moral world. Read it again. Though its operation there is just as simple and undeviating, and they therefore do not cooperate with it. Suffering is always the effect of wrong thought in some direction. It as an indication that the individual is out of harmony with himself, with the law of his being. The sole and supreme use of suffering is to purify, to burn out all that is useless, and impure. Suffering ceases for him who is pure. There could be no object in burning gold after the dross has been removed, and perfectly pure and enlightened being could not suffer. The circumstances which a man encounters with suffering are the result of his own mental harmony. The circumstances which a man encounters with blessedness are the result of his own mental harmony. Blessedness, not material possessions, is the measure of right thought. Wretchedness, not lack of material possessions, is the measure of wrong thought. A man may be cursed and rich, he may be blessed and poor. Blessedness and riches are only joined together when the riches are rightly and wisely used, and the poor man only descends into wretchedness when he regards his lot as a burden unjustly imposed. Indigence and indulgence are the true extremes of wretchedness. They are both equally unnatural and the result of mental disorder. A man is not rightly conditioned until he is a happy, healthy, and prosperous being. And happiness, health, and prosperity are the result of a harmonious adjustment of the inner with the outer, of the man with his surroundings. A man only begins to be a man when he ceases to whine and revile and commences to search for the hidden justice which regulates his life. And as he adapts his mind to that regulating factor, he ceases to accuse others as the cause of his condition and builds himself up in the strong and noble thoughts, ceases to kick against circumstances but begins to use them as aids to his more rapid progress and as a means of discovering the hidden powers and possibilities within himself. Law, not confusion, is the dominating principle in the universe. Justice, not injustice, is the soul and substance of life. And righteousness, not corruption, is the molding and moving force in the spiritual government of the world. This being so, man has but to right himself to find that the universe is right. And during the process of putting himself right, he will find that as he alters his thoughts towards things and other people will alter towards him. The proof of this truth is in every person, and it therefore admits of easy investigation by systematic introspection and self analysis. Let a man radically alter his thoughts, and he will be astonished at the rapid transformation it will effect in the material conditions of his life. Men imagine that thought can be kept secret, but it cannot. It rapidly crystallizes into habit, and habit solidifies into circumstances. This is one of my favorite lines. I'll read it again for you. Men imagine that thought can be kept secret, but it cannot. It rapidly crystallizes into habit, and habit solidifies into circumstances. Bestial thoughts crystallize into habits of drunkenness and sensuality, which solidifies into circumstances of destitution and disease. Impure thoughts of every kind crystallizes into enervating and confusing habits, which solidify into distracting and adverse circumstances. Thoughts of fear, doubt, and indecision crystallize into weak, unmanly, and irresolute habits, which solidify into circumstances of failure, indigence, and slavish dependence. Lazy thoughts crystallize into habits of uncleanliness and dishonesty, which solidify into circumstances of foulness and beggary. Hateful and condemnatory thoughts crystallize into habits of accusation and violence, which solidify into circumstances of injury and persecution. Selfish thoughts of all kinds crystallize into habits of self seeking, which solidify into circumstances more or less distressing. On the other hand, beautiful thoughts of all kinds crystallize into habits of grace and kindliness, which solidify into genial and sunny circumstances. Pure thoughts crystallize into habits of temperance and self control, which solidify into circumstances of repose and peace. Thoughts of courage, self reliance, and decision crystallize into manly habits, which solidify into circumstances of success, plenty, and freedom. Energetic thoughts crystallize into habits of cleanliness and industry, which solidify into circumstances of pleasantness. Gentle and forgiving thoughts crystallize into habits of gentleness, which solidify into protective and preservative circumstances. Loving and unselfish thoughts crystallize into habits of self forgetfulness for others, which solidify into circumstances of sure and abiding prosperity and true riches. A particular train of thought persisted in, be it good or bad, cannot fail to produce its results on the character and circumstances. A man cannot directly choose his circumstances, but he can choose his thoughts, and so indirectly yet surely shape his circumstances. Nature helps every man to the gratification of the thoughts which he most encourages, and opportunities are presented which will most speedily bring to the surface both the good and evil thoughts. Let a man cease from his sinful thoughts, and all the world will soften towards him and be ready to help him. Let him put away his weakly and sickly thoughts, and lo, opportunities will spring up on every hand to aid his strong resolves. Let him encourage good thoughts, and no hard fate shall bind him down to wretchedness and shame. The world is your kaleidoscope, and the varying combinations of colors which at every succeeding moment it presents to you are the exquisitely adjusted pictures of your ever moving thoughts. It's a good line to be used in your essays or something. So you will be what you will be. Sorry. So you will be what you will to be. Let failure find its false content in the poor world environment, but spirit scorns it and is free. It masters time, it conquers space, it cowers that boastful trickster, chance, and bids the tyrant circumstance uncrowned and fills a servant's place. The human will, that force unseen, the offspring of a deathless soul, can hew a way to any goal through walls of granite intervene. Be not impatient in delays, but ways as one who understands. When spirit rises and commands, the gods are ready to obey. Chapter 3, Effect of Thought on Health and the Body. The body is the servant of the mind. It obeys the operations of the mind, whether they be deliberately chosen or automatically expressed. At the bidding of unlawful thoughts, the body sinks rapidly into disease and decay. At the command of glad and beautiful thought, it becomes clothed with youthfulness and beauty. Okay, so we are done with the 25-minute ka session. We'll take a short break, okay, and then we'll continue with the book. Okay, so we are done with the book. Sorry, we are done with the break. Now we'll continue with the book. All right, I'll start the Pomodoro session again. I'll start with chapter 3 again from the very beginning. Effect of thought on health and the body. The body is the servant